Hi, everyone. Hold on to your hats and get yourself cozy because today's episode is shocking. I have 3 stories that are sure to remind you to keep your eyes and ears open and looking over your shoulder. Not paying attention is not an option. So get ready to batten down the hatches, but first, please capture that subscribe button. Great. Now let's get into the stories. West Virginia, 2002. I'm going to tell you about the strange events that happened in my small town. It all started on a summer evening in June of 2002. Our town, which is nestled amongst the rolling hills of West Virginia and surrounded by dense forests, was known to be peaceful. The locals were friendly, and life seemed to flow at a relaxed pace. However, little did we know that everything about that summer was about to change. I was a young kid at the time, about 12, and so I spent most of my days playing outdoors with my friends. We would often explore the woods, looking for hidden treasures or secret hideouts. But one day, we overheard the adults whispering about strange sightings in the area. They talked about a creature from local lore known as the Mothman, a mysterious being with large red eyes and black wings. At first, we didn't think too much about it. But the stories persisted, and curiosity got the better of us. So we started listening more and more. Eventually, we got so interested and naively decided to take off on an adventure to figure out the truth behind the Mothman. That evening, as the sun was setting, we gathered near an old oak tree at the edge of town. We each told our parents we were headed to a different friend's house. Armed with flashlights and excitement and fear, we ventured into the nearby forest. The dense leaves cast eerie shadows, and the rustling created an atmosphere that scared us all to death. But at the time, we were too chicken to tell each other how scared we were. We treaded cautiously, our eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of the creature. The wind was wisping through the trees, and every crackle of a branch made us jump. That night, we only searched for 15 minutes or less, all telling each other we were tired when really we were terrified. Little did we know that our encounter was eventually going to become a chilling reality. As days turned into weeks, the reports of Mothman stories, even sightings, in our town continued to grow. People claimed to have caught glimpses of its silhouette soaring through the moonlight sky, its eyes glinting ominously. The atmosphere in the town was mixed with fear and fascination, and we kids couldn't help but overhear all of the conversation. One evening, while sitting on my porch and looking up at the sky, I noticed a peculiar movement near the town's abandoned mill. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, its wings outstretched, resembling a giant moth. My heart raced, and I realized it was the Mothman. I ran in the house and called my friends. We all made a plan to head to the old mill. As we cautiously approached the area, we all started to hear and feel a loud humming, sort of a buzzing sound. We stopped and looked, and before we knew what was happening, we watched as the Mothman took flight from a tree off to our right. Its powerful wings created a gust of wind that made it difficult to stand, and we watched in awe as it circled above us, its eyes glowing eerily in the moonlight. It seemed to be watching us, studying our every move until flying off into the distance. The sight was completely terrifying, leaving us horrified and knowing that without a doubt we should not have come here. We all ran back to our respective homes as fast as we could. From that night forward, our town was plagued with unexplained phenomena. Strange lights flickered in the sky. Eerie sounds could be heard through the night. People reported vivid nightmares, and they were increasingly becoming afraid to go outside. Driven by a mixture of young stupidity, determination, and fear, my group of friends and I then devised a plan to find the Mothman. So we gathered at the outskirts of town. The moon was high and bright, casting a strange glow on us as we prepared to face the creature. As we ventured into the forest, our hearts were pounding. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. And then we saw it. The Mothman emerged from the darkness with its wings spread wide, filling the air with a sense of foreboding and almost death. Summoning every ounce of bravery within us, we chanted for it to leave, hoping we could call it away, banish the creature. It screeched, flickering in and out of our sight, and it felt like we were fighting a battle between light and darkness. The air crackled with energy and the wind howled through the trees as if nature itself knew what was happening. And then with a final surge, the creature let out a haunting cry, flapped its wings, and retreated. Slowly we watched as it faded into the night, leaving a silence behind. To this day, our small town carries the scars of what happened that June. People still tell the story of the Mothman to new generations, to remind them that there's a balance between what we know and what we don't. I'm not sure that what my group of friends did was what actually made the Mothman leave, but either way, we like to think that we had some part of it. Just remember, sometimes the most extraordinary and terrifying experiences can teach us the most valuable lessons. Bowling Green, Kentucky, September 1997. In the fall of 1997, a girl went missing in my town. I was 24 at the time, and my brother was a volunteer firefighter. He asked me to be part of one of the search parties the town organized to look for her. We spent days sweeping parks, abandoned lots, and the forests around town. As the days passed, the search parties got smaller, but I stayed with it, as did most of the people on my crew. We did second sweeps of the deeper forested areas, knowing that she would be harder to find out there. With fewer of us out there, we broke off alone, but we were usually within yelling distance of each other. And we also had walkie-talkies. One afternoon, about an hour before dusk, I spotted some weird marks. I was keeping an eye out for footprints, either child-sized ones or adult ones that might mean someone had brought her out here. But the tracks were not shoe prints. They looked like a bare foot, a huge footprint with marks at the toes, almost like claw marks. But the shape was decidedly human, and there were only 2 prints. Someone was walking upright, so it couldn't be an animal. I called another crew member over to take a look, and he was just as confused as I was. Since we couldn't rule out that they were human, although they were weird, we followed them. We followed them for what felt like miles into the woods. It was getting late and dark, but we didn't want to lose the marks overnight, in case it rained and they washed away. So we radioed for help and got one other person, an older guy in the department. He seemed even less convinced about the footprints, but agreed to follow them with us. At dusk, the footprints are definitely harder to see, even with flashlights. We had to slow down and search carefully. It was starting to seem less likely that someone had carried the girl this far, but we weren't ready to give up on the only lead that we had had so far. While we were stumbling around in the near dark, we started hearing strange sounds. Someone or something walking and stepping on twigs and dry leaves. We called out, thinking that it might be another member of the search party, but no one answered. We swung our flashlights around, but we still didn't see anything. Sounds continued, and I thought about the marks. Whoever left them might still be out there with us, and it could be someone dangerous considering the circumstances. The 3 of us stood back to back looking into the forest. I had a small knife with me, and the flashlights were heavy duty, but they weren't exactly any kind of a weapon. Finally, we saw a shape approaching. It was just a tall shadow walking towards us, slowly and awkwardly. We called out some more, asking the thing to identify itself, but it didn't answer. And as it got closer, I noticed that the shape was all wrong. This thing was wider than a human, and the head was way too big, and it was slightly hunched over, and the legs were bent backwards, almost like a dog, although he was walking upright. We pointed all 3 flashlights at the thing and pretty quickly could tell that it was not a man. Also, that it had almost certainly made the tracks that we were following. It was on 2 feet and had a vaguely human shape, but the rest of it was some kind of canine. especially the chest and the head. It was covered in thick fur, and its face looked more dog than human. It had a pointed face and ears that stuck straight up. Its mouth was open and saliva dripped from its very sharp-looking teeth. It slowly stepped towards us, never looking away, staring straight into our eyes. The eyes were glowing faintly in the dark. We backed away as it advanced, moving back the way we had came. It didn't change its pace, and neither did we. At least until it howled and lunged, and then we took off running. It took us a long time to get out of those woods. It was dark. We were panicked. We got lost a few times. Occasionally, one of us would think that we saw the creature, and we would start running again. It was absolute chaos, actually. Eventually, we made our way out of the forest, and we called the police. While we waited for them to arrive, we planned what we would tell them. All we could agree on was that it was some kind of half-man, half-dog beast. But we knew that that would sound ridiculous, and no one would believe us. So we planned on saying that we had just followed human footprints deep into the forest, and that we believed that the person who took the little girl had made them. The police obviously arrived, and they agreed to send a team the next day, and to follow our instructions to where we had lost the footprints. After a full day's search, though, they returned, saying that they couldn't find anything suspicious. They also didn't say anything about a dog creature either. And 2 days later, the girl was found alive. She had wandered off and gotten lost in the thick trees. It was a miracle that she was even alive, especially when I think about what we saw. We made some general reports to animal control about a wild dog in the woods, but they didn't take that very seriously. And to this day, I can't explain what I saw in there and how that girl survived, but I've never gone back in those woods, and I never will. Two of my friends and I were headed to Grafton Lake State Park in New York on a Sunday evening in the summer of 2005. We were on summer break from college and were going to camp that night nearby and head into the park and over to the lake in the morning. We were trying to get there in enough time to set up camp before it got too dark. I remember it was around 5 o'clock at night. We had the windows down and were enjoying the scenery as well as celebrating the end of the day, since we had all worked that day at our respective summer jobs. All of a sudden, my friend sitting in the back seat yells behind me, "What was that?" I looked at him, and he had his head tilted out the window, staring out into the woods and pointing. I looked out my window in the direction he was pointing, and I saw this large, bipedal creature running through the woods, its image flashing in my mind as it ran and flickered behind the trees. It was hard to tell exactly how far away it was because the thing seemed huge. I would put it at about 7 feet or more and about 50 yards or so away. One thing about it that really confused me was the way it ran. It was very odd. It seemed to be running on 2 legs, but its arms were swinging back and forth like the way a human would run, and its head was bobbing up and down as it ran, which made me think that maybe it was chasing something and trying to keep its eye on some kind of prey. I had never seen anything like this before, so my mind started racing with all of the possible explanations of what I could have been looking at. We sat there staring out the window for about 10 seconds or so, trying to make sense of what we had just seen when suddenly from behind us came this loud bang and it shook the entire car. My friend who was driving slammed on the brakes and we all turned around to see that the back window of the car was shattered. But there was no reason for that to have happened. We weren't near anything that could have caused it to break. No falling trees or flying rocks, and there was no wind outside. I remember being terrified and thinking how weird it was that we simultaneously were looking at this strange animal, and at the same time our back window basically explodes. I looked again into the trees, but super scared of actually seeing anything again. But it was gone. Worse yet, I kept thinking about how the sun was starting to go down, and we knew that it would get dark very quickly after that. My friends and I were totally unable to make sense of what was happening, so we decided to just drive up a little further before we checked anything out, in case whatever we had been looking at came back out again. We definitely did not want that to happen. We drove maybe another quarter of a mile up the road before pulling over to the side and getting out of the car and assessing the damage. The back window was completely shattered, but there were no pieces of glass inside the car because the window was still sort of intact. I guess that's a safety thing on cars. Looking at the windshield all cracked like that, it was a big awakening to us, even though I think we probably had it in our minds that we could originally continue on to the campsite. We unanimously decided that it was best if we just drove back home and forgot about the whole overnight thing. So we turned the car around in the middle of the road and headed back down towards where everything had taken place. We had no choice but to go back that way if we wanted to go home, unfortunately. So then as soon as we got back to the area where we saw the creature, my friend yelled, "There it is!" I squinted and looked up ahead of us into the trees, but there was this huge rock on the side of the road. I originally thought that he had meant he had seen the creature again and was yelling about that. But he said, "No, look at the rock. That's what hit us." We stopped the car to look at it. The rock was huge. No one could have ever lifted that thing that I knew of and thrown it the way it came at us. We all just looked at each other in disbelief, but quickly continued driving away. We didn't say much to each other after that. We were all in shock. Honestly, the rock looked like it could have weighed 100 pounds. And it would have had to have been hurled from quite a distance. So thinking about the thing that we had just seen moments earlier made me believe that whatever it was stronger than I wanted to think. I mean, to be able to pick up that rock and throw it at our car. As I was thinking about all of that, suddenly to our right, something in the woods caught our attention and we all yelled. We were definitely on edge. We quickly turned our heads in the direction to see what it was, but we were sure to keep the car going this time. And again, we saw the huge creature, and it appeared to be bipedal and running on 2 legs, just like the first time. But this time it was darker outside, and we could now see large, glowing eyes. And again, its arms were swinging back and forth as it ran. Obviously, we had never seen anything like this before this day, and now twice. So our minds were racing with the possible explanations. Our brains were trying to make logical sense out of all of it. But whatever it was had already disappeared back into the woods again. This time, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that whatever we had seen, both of these times, was definitely not human. There was no stopping us from going home now. We drove as fast as we could down the road. We didn't want to be near those woods at all. And I'm pretty sure that whatever was in there obviously did not want us there, or anywhere in the area. As we drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what else might be out there in those woods waiting to be discovered, or if there were more than one of what we saw. Because thinking of how that rock came at us from behind, I sort of think there was more than one. When we got home, we didn't tell our parents or anyone else what had happened. I personally was scared and didn't want to be made fun of or ridiculed by anyone. But I still think about that day. I think about it often, and I wonder. I've never seen anything like it since, thank goodness, but I can say with 100% conviction that whatever it was definitely not a human figure. Do you think that there are creatures like this one, waiting to be discovered? What do you think this creature was? Please let me know so I can get some rest.